On a warm August morning in the year 79 AD, inside a dark brick kitchen in the Roman city of Pompeii, a man pushed 81 round loaves of shaped dough into a domed stone oven. He closed the iron door, sealed it tight, and stepped out into the street. He would never return to open it. A few hours later, Mount Vesuvius erupted. A wave of superheated ash and toxic gas buried Pompeii in minutes. The city was erased, preserved under 20 feet of volcanic debris, frozen in time for nearly 2,000 years. When archaeologists finally cleared the ash in the mid-19th century, they unlocked that sealed oven. Sitting inside were those 81 loaves of bread, blackened, carbonized, but intact. Every line cut into the crust was still visible, every slice mark preserved. And stamped clearly into the top of the dough was a row of raised Latin letters: Seller, slave of Quintus Granius Verus. It was a quality seal, a mark required by Roman law to hold the baker accountable for the weight and purity of his loaves. Seller was a slave working in the dark, breathing flour dust that would eventually ruin his lungs. Yet his labor was so critical to the survival of the imperial city that his name was literally burned into the food people ate. Today we walk into a supermarket and buy a bag of pre-sliced white bread without a second thought. We view the baker as a quiet craftsman or perhaps an automated factory machine. But for thousands of years, the baker was something else entirely. The baker was the difference between order and utter collapse. They were the unsung engineers who allowed humanity to abandon the wilderness and build the first cities. Kings courted them, emperors feared them, and when bakers stopped working, empires burned. Yet the true origin of this ancient profession and the silent, dangerous power bakers held over global politics is a story almost nobody knows. To understand why ancient rulers cared so much about bread, you have to ask a simple question. How do you keep tens of thousands of people from killing each other inside a city wall? In a hunter-gatherer tribe, everyone gathers food. If food runs out, the tribe moves. But a city is a trap. Tens of thousands of human beings are packed into stone streets. They do not farm. They do not hunt. They build weapons, write laws, forge iron, and build temples. If a city runs out of food for 3 days, civilization vanishes. Chaos takes its place. Ancient rulers realized very early that raw grain was useless to an urban population. Wheat berries are hard, indigestible, and impossible to chew. You cannot feed a hungry, rioting crowd by handing them a sack of raw, unground wheat. They need cooked calories. They need food that is portable, cheap, and ready to eat right now. They needed the baker. The baker took the raw, chaotic yield of distant farmland and transformed it into the uniform currency of human energy. Without the baker, the Roman army could not march. Without the baker, the pyramids of Giza could not be raised. Without the baker, medieval trade networks would have collapsed before they began. Yet this created a profound contradiction that haunted ancient societies for thousands of years. The people who held the keys to urban survival were almost always treated as lower-class laborers, servants, or slaves. They worked through the night in suffocating heat, inhaling toxic stone dust from querns and fine flour that clogged their nasal passages. They were blamed whenever weather ruined a harvest, and they were the first to be lynched when prices rose. Why would anyone take on such a dangerous, physically brutal job? The answer lies in a strange, forgotten discovery made thousands of years before the first city was ever built. Long before there were ovens, ancestors were simple flat rocks resting over open pit fires. Around 12,000 BC, in the Fertile Crescent, early humans began harvesting wild barley and einkorn wheat. They ground these seeds between 2 rough river stones, mixed the gritty powder with water, and poured the wet porridge onto hot stones. The result was flat, dense, and brick-like. It was difficult to chew and went stale within hours. For centuries, this was bread, an unappealing slab of charred starch. Then, around 3000 BC in ancient Egypt, something impossible happened. Historians believe it began as an accident. A bowl of raw grain porridge was left out in the humid Egyptian heat. Someone forgot about it. Perhaps a slave was called away, or a household was interrupted. Over several hours, invisible microscopic hitchhikers in the air, wild yeast spores, along with lactobacillus bacteria, landed on the wet paste. They began eating the natural sugars in the grain, burping out carbon dioxide gas and alcohol. When the worker returned, the porridge had changed. It was bubbling. It smelled sour, sweet, and alive. Instead of throwing the ruined batter away, the worker scraped it onto a hot stone or placed it inside a clay pot buried in embers. As heat hit the fermented dough, the trapped bubbles of carbon dioxide expanded rapidly. The protein structure of the wheat set around those bubbles, creating a light, airy, soft sponge. The heat cooked out the alcohol, leaving behind a complex, rich aroma that had never existed on Earth before. It wasn't just tasty, it was a biochemical revolution. Fermentation broke down complex starches and phytic acid, making the nutrients inside grain far more accessible to the human body. It kept the bread soft for days longer than flat cakes. The Egyptians were so mesmerized by this process that foreign neighbors gave them a specific nickname: the bread eaters. Egypt was the first civilization to turn baking into a true profession. They designed the world's first dedicated baking ovens, tall, conical clay structures heated by fire from below. They realized that if you saved a small piece of yesterday's fermented dough and mixed it into today's fresh batch, the magic happened much faster. They had invented the sourdough starter, a living, biological culture passed down from parent to child, maintained for decades at a time. Bread became so central to Egyptian life that it replaced money. The workers who cut massive limestone blocks for the Great Pyramid of Giza were not paid in gold or silver. They were paid in bread and beer. A standard daily wage for a laborer was 4 thick loaves of bread and 2 jugs of unrefined beer. If the pharaoh's overseers ran short on bread rations, construction ground to a halt. The world's first recorded labor strikes in history were not over working conditions or safety. They were over delayed bread deliveries. In early Greece, baking was still considered a household duty managed largely by women. But as Greek city-states grew, specialized master bakers emerged. They were called artokopos. They began experimenting with different flour grades, sea salt, wine must, and olive oil, creating over 70 distinct varieties of bread. When Rome conquered Greece, they imported these Greek master bakers as prisoners of war. To the Romans, these educated slave bakers were prized possessions, bought at slave markets for astronomical sums. Rome was growing at a terrifying pace. By the late Republic, over 1 million people lived within the city limits. The city was a tinderbox. The lower classes lived in cramped, wooden tenement buildings called insulae. These buildings were so prone to catching fire that the city passed strict laws banning open cooking flames inside them. Think about what that meant. Hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens could not cook their own meals. They had no kitchens. They could not boil grain. They could not bake bread. Every single day, an entire metropolis had to buy prepared food from commercial establishments. The Roman government realized that if the supply of baked bread failed for even 48 hours, the city would devour itself in rioting. To prevent revolution, the empire created the kura ananai, the grain dole. The state imported millions of tons of wheat from Egypt and North Africa every year and distributed it to citizens. To process this mountain of grain, Rome built the world's first industrial baking engine. Bakers were no longer domestic workers. They became state contractors, organized into a powerful, rigid guild called the Collegium Pistarum. The Roman baker was called a pister, derived from pincere, meaning to pound. Inside a large Roman commercial bakery, the noise and scale were staggering. Massive hourglass-shaped mills made of dark volcanic basalt stone were turned around the clock by blindfolded donkeys or enslaved workers. To mix dough on an industrial scale, Romans invented the world's first mechanical dough kneader. A large stone basin with a rotating vertical shaft driven by horses, turning wooden paddles through thick dough. The wealth generated by these state-backed bakeries was immense. Consider the tomb of Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces. If you visit Rome today, near the ancient Porta Madre, you will see a 30-foot-tall stone monument built in the late 1st century BC. Eurysaces was a baker. More specifically, he was a former slave who bought his freedom, built a massive baking enterprise, secured lucrative contracts with the Roman military, and amassed a fortune. His tomb is decorated with detailed stone friezes showing his bakery in action. Grain being delivered, milled by horses, kneaded by machines, shaped by workers, and baked in giant stone ovens. Eurysaces was proudly declaring to all of Rome, "I was a slave, but I fed this empire, and my bread made me a king." Yet, this power came with a terrifying dark side. Because bread was tied directly to political control, Roman state bakers were not entirely free. Under late Roman law, baking became a hereditary sentence. If your father was a pister, you were legally forbidden from leaving the profession. You could not switch jobs. You could not join the military. You could not sell your property without state approval. The baker was trapped inside the very system he fed. And when the Western Roman Empire finally crumbled in the 5th century, the massive trade networks shattered with it. The great industrial bakeries went dark. Europe fell into a fragmented, localized medieval world where the baker's role took an even darker, more authoritarian turn. By the 11th century, Western Europe had restructured itself under feudalism. Land was controlled by local nobility, and the peasantry worked the fields in exchange for protection. In this rural landscape, bread was no longer a free state gift. It was a lucrative monopoly owned by the local lord. Under medieval law, ordinary peasants were strictly forbidden from building their own baking ovens at home. They were even forbidden from owning hand-operated stone querns to grind their own grain. The Lord built two massive assets on his estate, a watermill and a communal stone oven, known in France as the four banal. If a peasant wanted to turn their wheat harvest into bread, they were legally forced to bring their grain to the Lord's mill, where the miller took a cut of the flour. Then, they had to bring the flour to the Lord's official baker, who charged another fee to bake the loaves. If a peasant was caught grinding grain in secret at home using hidden handstones, feudal bailiffs would enter their home, break the stones with sledgehammers, and fine the family. This created deep resentment. Millers and bakers were viewed with intense suspicion, often accused of stealing flour or adulterating dough. As medieval towns grew into bustling cities like London, Paris, and Nuremberg, trade guilds took over regulation. Because bread accounted for up to 70% of an average worker's daily budget, governments regulated its price with aggressive severity. In 1266, King Henry III of England passed the Assize of Bread and Ale. The assize fixed the price of a loaf of bread to a single coin. Instead of changing the price of bread when grain prices fluctuated, the law required bakers to adjust the weight of the loaf. If wheat was expensive, a penny bought you a tiny, dense loaf. If wheat was cheap, a penny bought you a huge, heavy loaf. Special government inspectors walked through city markets carrying brass scale weights to test loaves fresh off the counter. If a baker's loaf was found to be even a fraction of an ounce lighter than the law demanded, the penalties were public, brutal, and humiliating. In London, a cheating baker was placed on a wooden sled used to carry manure and dragged by horses through the mud of the streets, with the light loaf tied around his neck. For repeated offenses, he was locked into the public pillory, where angry citizens pelted him with rotten vegetables and stones. His oven was dismantled, and he was banned from the trade forever. This terror of government inspection led directly to a phrase we still use today: a baker's dozen. To protect themselves from accidental weight variations caused by moisture loss during baking, bakers started adding an extra 13th loaf to every order of 12. That extra loaf was their insurance policy against the pillory. Yet, despite these laws, bakers faced an impossible situation. When harvests failed, they were caught between starving citizens who accused them of price gouging and inspectors who threatened them with imprisonment. It was a volatile dynamic, and in the late 17th century, a single spark inside a small London bakery would prove just how fragile an ancient city truly was. On the night of September 1, 1666, Thomas Fariner, an official baker to King Charles II, was finishing his work at his bakery on Pudding Lane in London. He extinguished the fires in his stone ovens, cleared the embers, and retired upstairs to sleep. He had no idea that a tiny coal was still smoldering inside a pile of kindling near the oven mouth. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, smoke filled the building. Fariner and his family escaped out an upper window onto a neighboring roof, but their assistant perished, the first victim of what was about to unfold. Driven by a fierce east wind, the sparks from Fariner's bakery leaped across the narrow, pitch-soaked wooden alleys of London. For 4 straight days, the fire consumed the city. It destroyed 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral. It wiped out 4/5 of the medieval city, leaving over 70,000 people homeless. The destruction of one of Europe's greatest capitals had been started by a single late-night oversight, by a weary baker. Yet, while a baker's mistake could accidentally burn a city, a shortage of a baker's product could deliberately burn down a monarchy. A century later in France, bread was the foundation of society, taking up 80% of a peasant's income. In the 1770s and 1780s, severe droughts, icy winters, and torrential rain destroyed wheat harvests across France. The price of flour exploded, and a loaf of bread jumped beyond what a laborer earned in a full day of work. In 1775, wave after wave of riots erupted across the countryside in what became known as the Flour War. Hungry crowds attacked bakeries, looted grain stores, and dragged bakers into the streets. By October 5, 1789, thousands of desperate women gathered in the markets of Paris, joined by armed men. They did not march on the local court. They began a 12-mile march through the mud directly to the royal palace at Versailles, holding pikes and knives, chanting single demand: bread! Bread! They broke into the palace, overwhelmed the royal guard, and forced King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to leave Versailles forever. As the royal carriage was escorted back to Paris surrounded by 60,000 cheering citizens, the crowd shouted, "We are bringing back the baker's wife, and the baker's little boy." They viewed the king as the ultimate bread giver of the nation. When he failed to guarantee their daily loaf, he lost his divine right to rule. 4 years later, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were sent to the guillotine. As the 19th century dawned, the Industrial Revolution created a desperate, competitive push to produce bread cheaper, faster, and whiter than ever before. In growing industrial cities, dark whole wheat bread was looked down upon as peasant food, while white bread was seen as a symbol of refinement and wealth. Because pure white wheat flour was expensive, dishonest commercial bakers turned to toxic chemical adulteration. They mixed cheap, spoiled flour with alum and aluminum compound that bleached flour bright white and allowed dough to hold more water. They added crushed chalk, plaster of Paris, bone ash, and sawdust to increase weight. In extreme cases, lead oxide was added for color. For decades, millions of city dwellers slowly poisoned themselves with every slice of daily bread. It was not until the 1850s, when pioneering chemists like Dr. Arthur Hill Hassel used microscopes to analyze food samples in London, that the horrific scale of bread adulteration was exposed, leading directly to the first modern food safety laws. At the same time, science transformed the process itself. In the late 19th century, Louis Pasteur unraveled the science of fermentation. Factories soon began mass-producing isolated strains of commercial baker's yeast. For 5,000 years, bakers had relied on slow, natural sourdough fermentation taking 12 to 24 hours. Commercial yeast reduced that time to a couple of hours. In 1928, American engineer Otto Rohvetter invented the world's first automatic bread slicing and wrapping machine, spawning the phrase, "the greatest thing since sliced bread." By 1961, scientists developed the Chorleywood bread process. Using high-speed mechanical mixers, chemical dough conditioners, and heavy doses of yeast, factories could turn raw flour into a soft-sliced loaf in just 80 minutes. The ancient art of baking had finally been conquered by machines. Sourdough starters, stone mills, hand kneading, and artisan craftsmanship were replaced overnight by automated factories producing millions of identical white loaves. Today, if you walk through any modern city, you will see a quiet rebellion taking place. All over the world, people are rediscovering artisan bakeries. They line up on Saturday mornings to pay top dollar for a loaf of dark, crusty, blistered sourdough bread, made simply with ground whole grains, water, sea salt, and a living starter culture fermented for 24 hours. We think we are participating in a modern food trend, but we are not. We are returning to the very food that built human civilization. We are eating the exact same bread that Cellar baked in his dark kitchen in Pompeii before Vesuvius erupted. The same bread that fed the stonecutters at Giza. The same bread that the women of Paris marched to Versailles to reclaim. When you tear open a fresh loaf of sourdough bread and hear the crackle of the crust, you are smelling the chemistry of wild airborne yeast, wheat protein, and fire. You are tasting an uninterrupted chain of human knowledge passed down through hundreds of generations of forgotten workers. Men and women who worked through the night in suffocating heat, whose lungs were coated in flour dust, who were dragged through the mud for being an ounce short, and who were blamed when the rain failed to fall. The history of the baker is not a story about food. It is the story of how humanity learned to harness nature, condenses it into calories, and build the modern world, loaf at a time.